Subcommittee now stands in order. I want to welcome everybody to the first hearing of the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee. It's only fitting that with the subcommittee's focus on technology, competitiveness, and innovation, that our first hearing is on the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. For over 100 years, NIST has done outstanding work to promote public welfare and to support industrial growth. From setting standards for uniform pipe threads on fire hydrants to time measurements that make electronic financial transactions and the global positioning system, or GPS, work, NIST has always been responsive to industries and the public's needs. NIST's development of uniform pipe thread standards for fire hydrants was one of NIST's first success stories. 3 years after NIST's creation, a fire in Baltimore largely destroyed the city because when adjacent fire companies within a 100-mile radius came to the assistance of Baltimore, they found that their hoses and the fire hydrants in Baltimore didn't have a uniform standard and didn't work together. NIST solved that problem over time. However, when I mention NIST to my colleagues, most don't recognize that name as a federal agency. Perhaps the Manufacturing Extension Program, or MEP, perhaps the Advanced Technology Program have a little visibility in the Congress and among my constituents. But when I meet with industry representatives, while their technical staff may know about NIST, frequently the business executives and the line folks do not. During the next 2 years, I hope to educate my colleagues in Congress and the broader public about the great importance of NIST. I know that Dr. Jeffrey shares this goal as well. Now, on to the issue at hand, the administration's fiscal year 2008 budget request for NIST. I'm glad that the administration has recognized the importance of at least a portion of NIST's work as outlined in the American Competitiveness Initiative. Congress and the prior administration have long been supportive of the NIST lab programs. During the past 15 years, NIST's lab budget has increased by 130%. When President Clinton took office, the NIST lab budget was $163 million. 8 years later, it was $313 million. In addition, Congress has also provided more than $310 million for the construction of new lab facilities. There are few federal agencies that have grown so rapidly over the past decade. The Science and Technology Committee has always been NIST's strongest supporter. I'm concerned that this administration follows a strategy of paying for increases in the lab programs and construction by cutting funding for the MEP and proposing repeatedly to eliminate ATP. Both of these programs are successful public-private partnerships which have contributed greatly to American innovation and competitiveness. I hope that we can break this cycle where every year the administration proposes either eliminating or cutting these two programs, and then Congress has to restore the funding. NIST has not had an authorization for all of its programs since 1992, and I intend to break this cycle also. I want to move a complete NIST authorization bill through Congress. I'm hoping that the administration will work with me on this effort. We need to move on an authorization bill which sets NIST on a path to broadly support innovation and competitiveness in the United States and with our friends and competitors around the world. We are in a global race for economic competitiveness, and we can't afford to stand idly by and watch our economy burn to the ground as happened to Baltimore 100 years ago. Now I would like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Georgia, Dr. Gingrey, for his opening remarks.
And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I'm very excited for our subcommittee's first hearing of the 110th Congress. And I want to thank my friend from Oregon, Mr. Wu, for organizing this hearing and look forward to working with him over the next 2 years on technology and innovation, issues that are vital to our economic competitiveness. It's quite important that this first hearing on the Technology and Innovation Subcommittee is about one of our nation's scientific stars, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Almost every federal agency in the United States industry sector uses the standards, measurements, and certification services that NIST Laboratories provides. The breadth of NIST application stretch from guidelines to the accuracy and reliability of electronic voting machines, to research into the causes of building and structural failures, and to making healthcare information technology interoperability a reality in a healthcare delivery system. A must-do, in my opinion, to deliver the kind of radical reforms needed to improve the quality and lower the cost of delivering health care in this country. The future of many cutting-edge technologies also depends on the research and technical expertise of NIST laboratories. Emerging fields such as nanotechnology and bioengineering will not become mature industries and markets without the existence of scientifically based industrial measurements and standards. Beginning last year, the President recognized the important role that NIST plays in our nation's economic security and started NIST on a path to double its core research and facilities budget by 2017. I fully support the President's American Competitiveness Foundation initiative and the Office of Science and Department of Energy. I look forward to hearing more details today about the role NIST will play in the President's American Competitiveness Initiative. And I am interested to hear the administration's rationale in requesting only $46 million for the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, the MEP program. The MEP program helps small and medium-sized United States manufacturers optimize their operations and remain competitive in the global economy. And it is a critical program that is worthy of taxpayer dollars. It deserves the $106 million that Congress has provided in recent years, and I intend to work with my colleagues to see that it once again receives an adequate appropriation for FY08. Chairman Wu, I am pleased to have Mike Ryan, President and CEO of Tug Technologies, a company that is located in my district in Marietta, Georgia, with us today to discuss the importance of the MEP program. He has vast experience with a variety of MEP programs in different states of this great country and has some exciting success stories to share with this subcommittee. I thank all the witnesses for taking the time to be here today. I only wish that I could stay to hear what will be, I know, a fruitful and productive debate. However, as you know, a good friend and colleague, our own Dr. Charlie Norwood, passed away this week. And his funeral is this afternoon in Augusta, Georgia. In order to offer my condolences to his wife and family, I will be joining many of my colleagues as we leave here in just a few minutes to fly back to his services. So please keep his family and friends in your thoughts and prayers. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gingrey, and it's my understanding that the deadline for timeline for meeting downstairs for our friend Charlie is in about 12 minutes, and I just want to recognize that many of us are going, many of us would like to be there. Charlie was a gentleman and principled fellow. I enjoyed working with him on the Education Committee, and also went toe-to-toe with him on occasion, and he did each of those equally well, and I think, as the President would say, he was a good man.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I ask unanimous consent that all additional opening statements be submitted by committee members to be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. We have a very distinguished panel of witnesses, and I want to thank them for taking the time, traveling the distance, whether it's 2,500 miles or a dangerous 12 miles to Capitol Hill. And in this subcommittee, at least, the dangerous part of the journey is over. You will find a friendly environment, an inquiring friendly environment. Before we begin, I'd like to make a short introduction of each of the panelists, other than Mr. Ryan, who has already been very well introduced by Mr. Gingrey. First, Dr. Bill Jeffrey has been the director of NIST for the past year and a half or so. Before that, he was at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and he started his career at the Defense Airborne Reconnaissance Office. Since coming to NIST, Dr. Jeffrey has been their strongest advocate within this administration. Dr. Stan Williams of the Hewlett-Packard Corporation is a senior HP fellow and founding director of the Quantum Research Group. I've never been able to find anything there. Maybe you can tell me what I've been missing. Dr. Williams is an expert in nanotechnology and quantum computing. He has been awarded the Julius Springer Award for Applied Physics, the Feynman Prize in Nanotechnology, the Dreyfus Teacher Scholar Award, a Sloan Foundation Fellowship, and was named by Scientific American as one of the 50 top technology leaders. Mr. Michael Borrus is the founding general partner of X-Seed Capital, a seed-focused, early-stage venture fund. That plus your youth must be where the X comes from. Huh? He has taught at UC Berkeley and is the author of 3 books on high-tech issues. Mr. Peter Murray is the vice president of Welch, Allyn, a prominent manufacturer of patient monitoring equipment with a footprint across the world, but with a location, importantly, in Beaverton, Oregon. His company has relied upon the services of the Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or the MEP Center in Oregon. And Dr. Gingrey has already introduced Mr. Ryan, and if I may, have the envelope, please. No envelope. Gentlemen, I understand that you all have submitted substantial materials in writing. We have a 5-minute period for a statement, and if you could, please summarize and point out the highlights or lowlights or both of your written testimony. Dr. Jeffrey, let us begin with you.
Thank you. Chairman Wu, Ranking Member Gingrey, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to present the President's 2008 budget request for NIST. This is a strong budget that will further enhance our abilities to support the measurements and standards needs of U.S. industry and academia. NIST has a long history of being at the forefront of new innovations through our measurements and standards. In 2003, the National Academy of Engineering identified the greatest engineering achievements of the 20th century. NIST measurements and standards were integral to the successful development and adoption of virtually every one. 19 retrospective studies of economic impact show that on average, NIST labs generated a benefit-to-cost ratio of 44-to-1 to the U.S. economy. The high rate of return results from the fact that new measurements or standards benefit entire industries or sectors of the economy as opposed to individual companies. For example, NIST researchers recently developed new measurement techniques that cut up to 80% of the cost and time for industry to develop advanced materials. As one industry scientist put it, NIST scientists are reawakening a major element of creativity that analytical science almost lost. NIST also operates world-class user facilities. Last year, approximately 2,000 researchers from 60 different industries leveraged the NIST Center for Neutron Research, or the NCNR, and National Academy of Sciences report describes the NCNR's capability to image an operating fuel cell as a considerable achievement and one of the most significant analytical advances in the fuel cell realized in decades. Industry scientists have stated that the research performed at the NCNR has allowed them to jump 5 years ahead in fuel cell development. To prepare for the future, NIST is working with industry to identify critical measurement barriers to innovation, evaluating its physical infrastructure, forming new and strengthening existing partnerships, and updating the ways it stimulates the knowledge transfer from its labs to industry and academia. The increased funding provided through the budget request will directly support innovative advances in broad sectors of the economy, as well as improve the safety and quality of life for our citizens. For example, the research initiatives will speed the development and foster the adoption of nanotechnology products and provide the physical measurements to ensure their safety, accelerate the revolutionary economic potential in exploiting the unique properties of the quantum world, provide confidence and reduce uncertainty in measurements supporting global climate change models, reduce the risk to communities as they encroach on hurricane-prone coasts and fire-prone wildland-urban interface regions, and enhance the safety of new and existing structures from the catastrophic impact of earthquakes. To meet the demands for measurements at ever smaller scales, at faster rates, and with more accuracy, requires excellent laboratory and user facilities. The budget request, therefore, includes capacity and capability improvements at both our Boulder campus and the NCNR. The budget request for MEP is identical to last year's request and is a reduction of $58.3 million from the FY 2006 enacted. I recognize the difference in priority between the administration and Congress regarding the federal funding level for the MEP program. One thing that you can be certain of, regardless of the final appropriations, NIST will execute the program in the most effective manner possible to support the nation's small manufacturers. No funds for ATP are requested in the President's 2008 budget. The 2006 enacted budget was consistent with the phase-out of the program. The 2007 joint resolution, however, included funding for ATP. I understand it was approved by the Senate last night, and assuming it's signed by the President, NIST will initiate a new competition in 2008. In summary, recent NIST measurements and standards research have enabled innovations now embedded in the iPod, body armor, saving the lives of domestic law enforcement officers and our servicemen and women overseas, and diagnostic screening devices for cancer patients, making their treatment more targeted and accurate. The results of NIST research can be found in virtually every manufacturing and service industry. For more than a century, NIST research has been critical to our nation's competitiveness. The increased funding requested for NIST will directly support innovations in broad sectors of the economy that will quite literally define the 21st century. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. Dr. Williams.
Chairman Wu and Representative Gingrey, I thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of ASTRA, the Alliance for Science and Technology Research in America. Benjamin Franklin, often called the first American, was also the first American scientist. He understood that science was not just a pastime to demonstrate wealth or satisfy curiosity, but rather a force that could generate wealth and be utilized for the public good. Franklin performed careful experiments to characterize electrical phenomena. He was the first to understand the nature of electrical conduction, and he utilized his knowledge to invent the lightning rod, which was one of the most important technical advances of his day. Thus, Franklin created the distinctly American paradigm for technological innovation. If you measure something that has never been quantified before, you can discover something that has never been known before, which enables you to invent something which has never existed before. He said, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. Over a period of nearly 2 centuries, American technological innovation has been the primary source of our wealth in this country. ASTRA was founded in 2000 to work on behalf of and provide a more effective voice for industry, academe, and professional associations involved in the technology enterprise. Our members represent an underlying constituency of more than 2.4 million scientists and engineers in the United States who work every day to build a stronger America. The focus of today's testimony is NIST, and I gratefully acknowledge the extensive collaborations that Hewlett-Packard in general and my research group in particular have enjoyed with NIST scientists. ASTRA strongly endorses the doubling of the NIST budget because of its unique role and strategic importance to our country's research ecosystem. The mission of NIST is to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing metrology, standards, and technology to enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. As a government agency, it does so objectively, without favor or advantage to any preferred technology or enterprise. Unfortunately, the essential role NIST plays in enabling the competitiveness of American industry has often been under-recognized. Among other activities, NIST develops and improves measurement technologies, supplies critical reference standards used across industries to calibrate their products and services, and, from my point, most importantly, provides verified and reliable technical data to the scientific community. NIST scientists act as a critical check on the often conflicting and confusing claims coming out of various research labs. I consider these activities to be the core of the NIST mission and the keystone for technological innovation. Before we can discover and invent today, we must measure with extraordinary precision and trust the results. I compliment NIST on the extent of its efforts to understand and respond to the needs of industry and on the quality of its oversight programs. However, it is my observation that the scientific staff at NIST are now overwhelmed by their responsibilities. The number of new program areas that have been added to the NIST portfolio has really exceeded their funding increases. This mission creep has stretched the staff and slowed their ability to respond. In some cases, it has taken several years to complete key measurements, which can make them less valuable in an era of rapid technological change. In order to respond to new opportunities, NIST scientists often have to compete for grant funding from other federal agencies. While such activities can meet important governmental needs, the need for such activities should be an exception. ASTRA strongly recommends that all current NIST missions and programs, including the newly created NIST Center for Nanoscale Science and Technology, the ATP and the MEP should be adequately funded and supported by Congress and the administration under the Doubling Initiative. These programs are sound investments with high potential returns for American taxpayers. We should resist the temptation of adding new responsibilities, especially unfunded ones, in 2008 in the future until we can be certain that the current missions will be adequately served. An important issue to realize here is that during the next 5 years, the amount of scientific information that we will accumulate will double. In other words, we will learn as much about science over the next 5 years as we have over all of human history. So we somehow need to keep up with this information glut and make it something that we can internalize and understand and utilize. NIST must attract and hire a continuous stream of world-class researchers in order to carry out its mission. The 3 Nobel Prizes awarded to NIST staff in the past years demonstrate the quality of the current staff and have brought overdue recognition to NIST. However, in my view, the current climate at NIST is strained, with the technical staff having to work harder and longer to accomplish less. The budget doubling should be accomplished in a manner that the research support and infrastructure is improved to make the current staff more flexible and productive, which will in turn attract new scientific stars to the NIST staff. In summary, ASTRA believes that NIST must maintain its world leadership in metrology and understanding the infrastructure of emerging technologies in order for the U.S. to remain technologically and economically competitive. Nanotechnology, I think, is an ideal area of focus because of the tremendous potential it has for economic rewards and the acute demands it places on metrology. NIST holds the key to American technological innovation and competitiveness. Today, more than ever, exquisite measurement is necessary for discovery and invention. I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on these important issues.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Mr. Borrus.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of Congress, and staff members, for reasons I'll describe in a moment, I created XSEED to focus on a sorely neglected part of early-stage capital markets, the so-called seed stage, which is typically the first money raised by entrepreneurs to start a new business, to begin to transition an idea, a rudimentary technology, out of the laboratory toward the commercial marketplace. I am typically pitched by, my typical investment involves 2 entrepreneurs and 10 PowerPoint slides and not much else. I also want to call the committee's attention to several other parts of my background because they are relevant to my testimony today. Prior to entering the venture capital industry, I spent a little over half a decade as a startup entrepreneur, and for over a decade before that, I was at UC Berkeley on the engineering faculty, where my work focused on emerging new technologies, the commercialization of innovation, and related policy. My testimony is based on my experience in all those domains, studying, doing, and now investing in high-risk early technological innovation. As I've been asked to comment on the ATP program, I would also call the committee's attention to the fact that I currently serve on the outside External Industry Advisory Committee to ATP, and that I previously served on the National Academy's Steering Committee on Government Industry Partnerships, which issued 2 very detailed analyses reports on the ATP program in 1999 and then again in 2001. I have 3 simple points to make. I'll make them briefly, and they all lead to one conclusion. First, significant changes over the last 15 years in early-stage capital markets in the U.S. create, in my view, an urgent need for the ATP to be continued and for it to be substantially funded so that it can run new competitions. The most significant change in those markets is this. As the venture capital has grown and matured, the bulk of that industry has moved away from seed stage investing to invest later in the life cycle of a startup, when large amounts of capital can be efficiently deployed to permit companies to expand. Later on, at the point at which companies already have products developed, typically may actually have initial sales. That drift away from early stage funding has created a paradox. There's plenty of capital available to expand company operations, but there is too little capital available at the riskiest moment in a startup's life, at the very beginning, when only an idea, a concept, or a rudimentary technology exists and needs to be transitioned out of the lab across the so-called valley of death toward the commercial marketplace. Very few organized financing mechanisms of sufficient scale exist to address that problem. That, frankly, is why XSEED Capital exists, and that, frankly, is also ATP's historical sweet spot, and there is plenty of room for both of us. That leads to my next point. Why ATP? ATP is, quite likely, the most intensively studied, rigorously scrutinized, and carefully assessed U.S. technology program of the last 50 years at least. As the National Academy's reviews concluded, ATP is an extremely well-run program that works and works well. Several of its program features, notably its rigorous, peer-reviewed, pork-free, merit-based competitions, its emphasis on cost-sharing, its rigorous self-assessment, and its measured return on investment, set the standard to which other federal technology programs ought to aspire, which leads to my third point. As the committee knows, as a nation, we face a series of major challenges to which continued innovation is the best response. These include the need to move to carbon-neutral alternative sources, alternative energy technologies to maintain energy security for this country, escalating healthcare costs, driven by an aging population, one increasingly prone to chronic long-term illnesses like diabetes, the competitive rise as technological challengers of China, India, and other advanced economies, and not least the concomitant erosion of U.S. technological leadership in a number of significant areas. In addressing these challenges, why reinvent the wheel? Leverage a program that historically has helped to produce significant innovation and that works and works well. Use ATP. That leads to my conclusion. As a result of those arguments, I recommend that Congress should reauthorize the ATP program, provide sufficient funding for ATP to run several competitions, both general and specific competitions focused in areas of acute need, like the search for carbon-neutral alternative energy technologies. And picking up on your opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, also, I believe the committee should consider ways that ATP might be stably and predictably funded over a long enough time frame, perhaps a decade, to have a significant impact over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borrus, and I'd like to thank all the panelists to this point for both your excellent testimony and for your timeliness. I'd like to announce just a little bit in advance that, as is typical of this institution, we're not quite as entertaining as a three-ring circus, but we keep at least 3 rings going at any given time, so we do have floor action going on. I have another committee in which I understand there will be a vote sometime in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So if you notice a little shuffling up here, it is not out of disrespect for you, but out of concern for adequately discharging our different duties. And with that, Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank also the committee members and staff for inviting me here to testify on behalf of MEP. I can see my presentation's up, so we're off to a good start. What I want to talk to you about is the success we've had with our local MEP in Oregon, and I'll use the term OMEP because that's the acronym, and then briefly go through some of the details of the implementation, a success story, a very good success story, and then conclude with some observations of the funding and what I think it will do to our local chapter and project what I think it will do nationally. Again, that's my agenda. We don't need to see that. We started with OMEP in '04. The company was facing some serious competitive pressures, and we knew we needed to make some changes, and we began casting about to select a partner. And we clearly found OMEP to be the group that met our needs, and I'll speak a little bit more about that later, but briefly that's the timeline. What I'd like to show you now in a few minutes is just examples of the engagement work. It's a lot of detail. I just want to give you an example of the quality of the work that the organization provides. Again, these consultants are very tactical and also very strategic. They gave us a lot of customized solutions, and I'm just going to roll through these. There's a lot of generalized training that is shared among all of the clients of OMEP. They develop customized tools. I'm just going to kind of flip through these a little bit. Their examples are also in the written testimony. Again, the examples here really are to convey the point that they were teaching us how to fish as opposed to giving us a fish. These tools are broadly adopted now within our site in Oregon, as well as we're spreading them to some of our other sites in the company. Again, they gave us tools so that folks in the production area or anywhere in the company that were using these productivity enhancements could use them. Finally, some of the results that we achieved, as you can see up here, these details may not mean much, but they were extremely significant to our company. That represents about half of the company being trained in 2 years. Again, part of what OMEP brought to us was the ability to develop people with ongoing skills and raise their capabilities so that we could continue to make these improvements long after our engagement with OMEP was completed. Some of the results that we experienced, as you can see up here, a significant labor savings, plenty of reductions, and these are very typical results you'll see from an MEP engagement. Additionally, the company was facing some pressures to consolidate a wide variety of sites, and we ended up choosing Oregon as one of the sites to consolidate into as a result of these competitive improvements that the site had made. So not only are we more competitive externally, but we are competitive internally. I want to make a couple of closing comments. When I say why choose an OMEP, why did we decide to select an organization such as OMEP? One of the key differences between OMEP and some other providers that would give us similar kinds of services, I think, are the way the MEPs are measured on the client's results. It gives them a focus that is very much in the interest of the client. I don't know how else to say that any more simply. Again, you can see, again, this is what's summarized in my testimony, but they're both hands-on, they're both strategic. Finally, let me just wrap up with where I think the proposal, the funding proposal would go. I'm also on the board of our OMEP affiliate. I can tell you from personal experience, if they were faced with this funding reduction that's in the proposal from the administration, it would lead to a drastic reduction in services. I think it would reduce the ability to market to new clients. It will have a direct impact on the industry. It would, any company, facing a significant loss of revenues that this would represent would take similar action. And I firmly believe that the funding level should be restored and hopefully, with reason, expanded. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray. Mr. Ryan.
It's indeed a pleasure to have the opportunity to address the Health Science Subcommittee. Relative to my comments, I will share with you, I'm going to focus on the MEP and the role it plays in helping American companies to describe and to deploy lean methods. I'm currently the CEO and president of Tug Technologies in Marietta, Georgia. As Dr. Gingrey mentioned, Tug as such manufactures ground support equipment for domestic and international airlines, as well as the U.S. Armed Forces. If you look at out the window the next time your plane stops at the gate, you'll likely see a Tug baggage tractor, and you'll certainly see belt loaders that are also manufactured by Tug Technologies. I've had the unique opportunity over the last several years to work with 5 of the state MEPs, inclusive, of course, of the state of Georgia. But after spending 38 years in automotive and industrial companies, I would say to you, I've learned how to learn. It's about people and it's about learning. So today my thoughts to share with you specifically focus on the last 13 years, and as an American, I believe that we in this country can be globally competitive by deploying lean methods to our manufacturing base. The MEP has played an important supporting role to enhance American productivity, now on record for 18 years. Back in 1982, I presented at a conference in Brazil as a member of TRW's senior management team. At that time, I used the flag to designate and talk to the point of order comes before progress. The written words on the flag in Brazil actually say order me progresso. And I think that's significant to understand what that means as the associated task of the MEP continues to ramp up. In '91, the result of a U.S. government-supported productivity study of Japan was done, and the book that came from that was called The Machine That Changed the World. The machine is the Toyota production system in this designation in the book written by Womack and Jones. And it captures the Japanese work on productivity in the automotive industry primarily. I had the opportunity to work with Jim Womack during the time I worked for United Technologies, and he subsequently in '96 published a book, Lean Thinking. And in this book, he talks about a 5-step process, which I'll show you on the slides. Define the value of what you do, align it into a value stream, create flow from balancing process steps, create a pull process so the customer's needs are defined, associated to your demand support, and ultimately perfection can happen. And perfection is the perfect balance of the value stream, flow, pull, and perfection. They do, however, list some actions that are important to consider, and what I've done here is try to align those actions from that book in line with what the steps are they've identified as shown on this slide, and I show you the MEP interface that's appropriate to helping companies convert themselves through lean policy deployment processes. So significantly, the MEP has a role in these process steps to success in any company. Basis of learning from Womack and some additional actions. Basic learning from Womack and Jones when they looked at the Toyota production system is that we understood man, material, and machine, but we in America didn't have the entire puzzle put together. And this is a depiction of the Toyota production system in one slide, one picture. And what they've done here is identify puzzle pieces that, frankly, I believe we hadn't yet put together in this country. So how did we how did we take the learning from this to deploy change in this country? It's an important quote from the ultimate scientist in my mind, Albert Einstein. I've been referring to this for many years. And the questions I ask from this quote is, can we learn to change our minds? Can we understand the differences we face? Can we be globally competitive? Can we stay at the same level of thinking we were at when we created the significant problems we're trying to fix? And it's said that the definition of a fool is one who expects different results while doing the same things. So indeed, the challenge of lean, the challenge of the MEP profile is to make people understand and learn. In order to deploy lean, we have an implementation standard that optimizes the efforts of independent companies and is supported by an education process that understands the fundamental tools. What I'm showing you here is the depiction of the profile of implementation for any lean activities, and the support of MEP is critical here as well. The depiction is an umbrella with leadership, and I would submit to you that the national MEP is that leadership profile that allows us to succeed. But more importantly, the umbrella is this Congress as well. The members of the U.S. Congress represent the support needed by the MEP to truly lead the transformation process to change. On the next slides, I've just identified some of my experiences relative to those 5 different state MEPs. And in fact, I started my my understandings of the MEP from having played a part on the board of the Michigan MEP, notably the MMTC, Michigan Manufacturers Technical Center. The North Dakota MEP was engaged in our transformation when I worked as president and CEO of Bobcat Company. The teachers in Japan we call senseis. If we look back at the study that was originally done by Womack and Jones, the opportunity to coordinate and learn is a two-part process, if you would. The opportunity to create success is a significant amount of benefits, as I show on this slide. But truly, the MEP plays a role of support that would not have a high enough level of understanding to deploy the change processes required by that 6-step picture with the umbrella supporting it. So what are the benefits? Here are some of the benefits achieved from doing a lean transformation supported by MEP consultants. Significant improvements in revenue at one company of 86%, while operating income increased 128%. Again, North American company, competing globally. Improving inventory significantly, and improving the operational income of the companies by 400, 500, and 550 basis points of improved operational income. We reduced customer lead times and developed flawless launches as well. So now I ask you to think about a process. Consider that it has 3 versions at least. What you think it is, secondly, what it actually is, and then third here is what it should be, proper value stream mapping and understand. And you can imagine the efficiency improvements from that step 1, 2, and 3. Consider a moment that Henry Ford at the Rouge complex in Detroit delivered a car to each customer in a 4-day cycle from raw material to finished vehicle. And he did that in 1914. Most people don't know that he wrote a book called Today and Tomorrow in 1936 that described his lean process from some 22 years earlier. Eiichi Ono, indeed, developed the Toyota production system from his studies of Henry Ford's methods. One other important point, Toyota never had to change their bad habits since after the war they could start from the basics in 1947. The challenge in America, still today, is that we have to change people from their habits of the past to the global changes and challenges we'll need to have in the future. People do make the difference. In Japan, they call this body the JUSE, the Union of Japanese Scientists and Engineers. So they talk about people. We talk about basically the focus of NIST is science and technology, as subject matter very importantly. But here a quote from Jack Welch of General Electric, who challenges us all to go for the quantum leap. Can we do it by reducing MEP funding? I don't think so. If you pause to look at this picture, the worker is on the left talking to the engineer. We need to help the worker here so he can understand and also be empowered. Today, he is not. The salesmen in this picture are on the left. The two employees on the right are wearing safety glasses, so obviously they must be production workers. They need, though, a different set of tools, not just better pails, but the right tools so they can avoid the dilemma they're in the first place. In summary, MEP has been a strong contributor to the need in this country to stimulate change. They have been and need to continue as a catalyst for that change. They provide a countrywide network. Our government must continue to support enterprise. Small and medium-sized businesses need this kind of help even more. We must remember that the market is global and other countries are getting better too. MEP provides education, not just training, and not all good ideas originate in America. Our Congress has a responsibility to provide solutions, not just observe. I have found the MEP 5 times in 5 states. They are the solution. We should expand, not retract our support of the MEP. MEP is that synergy. If the 2007 budget is reduced from $109 million to $49 million, not only are past efforts of the MEP compromised, but it would show that that leadership umbrella I showed you, referring to it earlier, has been closed by our own Congress. Your constituents need your support. Your challenges as our representatives to this Congress are to find synergies that allow Americans to prosper in an ongoing, expanding global market. I submit that MEP is that synergy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. And now we will have some discussion here. I recognize the chair for 5 minutes. Dr. Jeffrey, we've had eloquent, effective testimony about the need for MEP. Let's just declare the 50-some-odd% cut in MEP dead on arrival for now, and we'll set that issue aside, and we'll move on to some other things and maybe circle back to that. I understand that NIST intends to recompete all the MEP centers this spring because you anticipate some reduction in funding from Congress. I'd like to understand from you as best as possible how much this recompetition will cost NIST and the MEP centers. I, quite frankly, think that Congress is more likely to relatively fully fund MEP again this year. And I'm a little bit concerned about a waste of not only money, but, you know, when you wave a axe in front of the whole flock of turkeys, it gets everybody upset, and nobody gets back to feeding and growing more turkey for a while. So I'd really like to understand why you're doing this, what the estimated cost is, and get a sense for how much this is going to upset the whole flock of very hard-working folks.
Well, the intent is certainly not to upset the flock. In terms of the actual cost, I will have to take that for the record. I don't have the numbers in front of me, and so I'd be happy to answer in writing to you on the cost. In terms of the rationale as to why do this at this point, to do an effective recompetition would take about 5 to 6 months. If the budget reduction did occur, and we were to start that after the final appropriations, By the time we completed that competition, we'd be out of money if we had all the centers at the same spend rate. So what the recompetition allows, one, is a more efficient way of trying to get through to try to extract where there may be some savings in the program, where there may be slightly different business models to attract additional fee extraction, and where there may be efficiencies in consolidation that would allow for the maximum amount of service. If the budget cut did occur and we waited until the end to then try to address that, we would actually have to be in a position of just cutting every single center by the same percentage, which would probably create much more disruption and a much weaker system at that point.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey, but given that Congress is opposed to the MEP recompetition, and in fact in fiscal year 05, NIST was specifically prohibited from doing the recompetition, I think there's some room to inquire as to why this path is being pursued, because if we need to, I suspect that we might put that prohibition back in the appropriations bill. And I'd like to get a sense from Mr. Murray and Mr. Ryan about what you think the effect of a recompetition across the country would have on MEP centers.
Can we reply?
Yes, I am asking both of you about
I'll go first.
your take on the effect of a recompetition.
I think it would be disastrous, to use a word. Again, I'm speaking as a board member of the affiliate in Oregon. The organization as it is now is extremely lean. I've been to their offices. They camp out in a kind of it's anything but plush. The staff is incredibly efficient and very lean. I really don't know where they would find additional savings. I think it would be a distraction for that business, take away already limited resources, look for new business or to market to other clients. I really think it would be a disaster. I can't say it strongly enough.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Mr. Ryan, do you have anything to add?
I mentioned earlier in my talk that the MEP represents synergy. One of the things that I don't believe we do well enough in our country in the manufacturing sector is identify the cost relationship between the supply chain steps. The OEM manufacturer of a finished product, the supplier of subsystems, the supplier of parts to the subsystems, etc., is the supply chain. Knotting that together, as well as by state representation, allows for some common methodology across the country to accept the challenge to be cost reducing our products and to accept the opportunity to be more competitive globally.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. I see that my time is actually 24 seconds over. If I do not have an opportunity to return to this particular topic, I would like the witnesses, especially you, Dr. Jeffrey, and Mr. Murray and Mr. Ryan, to comment upon what Dr. Jeffrey alluded to earlier, which is to compensate for the administration's proposed cuts, which in my view are, one hopes, unlikely at this point, by having them be absorbed by increasing charges to small and medium-sized manufacturers, and what the effect of this would be on services and uptake of services from the current client base or customer base, if you will. So the makeup of government funds through additional charges in fees. And with that, first of all, I'd like to, it was a shame to lose Dr. Gingrey for a very necessary trip for our friend Mr. Norwood, but I'd like to welcome, and Dr. Gingrey is the ranking member of the subcommittee. I'd like to welcome Mr. Hall, the ranking member of the full Science and Technology Committee. Thank you, Mr. Hall, for being here. And I understand that Mr. Smith would like to be recognized first for I wanted to welcome Mr. Hall, but my understanding is that Smith had some time constraints. Mr. Hall, a Southern gentleman, from morning to night. Mr. Smith, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I obviously am not a ranking member, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Mr. Ryan, I believe you talked about empowering workers and affording workers the tools. And do you feel that our existing channels of empowering workers are sufficient? What suggestions might you have for perhaps a change in paradigm or whatever the case might be to empower workers?
In my testimony, I made comments about 20 years ago when the country was focused on quality circles and SPC, statistics, if you would, Dr. Deming methodologies. That's some 20-plus years ago. What I showed in my presentation is an umbrella chart, as I call it, with 6 significant steps in sequence. And the second step in that sequence is empowerment of the people. But the first step is product cell structure. You have to be in an appropriate structural, physical manner in a manufacturing facility in order for people to be empowered. Otherwise, management just pushes the problem at the employee and frustrates them even more. So my point is that the discipline for that 6-step sequence, starting with the product cell structure to the 6-step standardization, the distinction of that is that the people get empowered once you create the structure that they can be and add what I call intellectual capital to the process. It's a huge opportunity that comes from a lean transformation. And again, the opportunity for productivity in this country amongst the people in small and medium-sized businesses is what will make us better as production management of large subsystems and vehicles and products for the associated markets served. So the people empowerment needs that first step, and the MEP understands that sequence. And frankly, if you just go hire a consultant in the local state and not the MEP support, what you'll find is unique opinions of what the proper process is. And again, as I said earlier, the Jim Womack, who's the expert in lean concepts from back in 1991 on the survey work back at MIT, the learning there is there, but the absolute application of that learning is still missing, and the linkage of the MEP. In my experience with 5 states, not all 50 yet, maybe I'll live long enough to do that, but in those 5 states, that linkage is common. And so I'm sharing with you that it isn't just a consulting activity, MEP. It's a common linkage of how things are done, and the philosophy will get us there. If we take it down a notch or 2 or 3 or in half, as the proposal says, we lose what we've built up over 18 years, unfortunately. And that would be a travesty. And I do believe that Congress needs to support the people, and the people need to understand the profile of lean. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, Dr. Jeffrey, how does NIST evaluate new projects and novel fields of research, and are potential economic benefits explicitly considered when determining priorities, research priorities, and do you perform a formal needs assessment with involvement from the external community?
Thank you, sir. The initiatives, our mission statement is to support the economic security and quality of life of Americans. And so every new initiative that we put forward goes through a rigorous internal process that includes inputs generally from industry. It includes looking at what the kinds of impacts will be. Often doing prospective studies have large errors to them, so often there's best technical judgments involved. Nanotechnology is a great example where there have been a number of studies that have indicated that nanotechnology in the next 10 years may be anywhere from a $1 to $2.5 trillion global enterprise. And a lot of the issues there have to do with the measurements, characterizations, which Dr. Williams very eloquently described in his testimony. In addition, we reach out to the private sector, probably more than any other part of the federal S&T enterprise, to really try to get an idea of what the potential measurement barriers to innovation are. In fact, we just completed our first assessment of what we call the U.S. measurement system, which actually looked at over 160 industry technical roadmaps had over 1,000 people from the private sector participating with the NIST scientists to try to identify where there are current measurement barriers to innovation. And so we've just cataloged that, just literally released the report, and now using that as also part of our strategic planning to identify and prioritize our investments.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Chandler.
Thank you, Chairman Wu, and I thank all of the witnesses for coming today. Appreciate you shedding some light on some of these topics. I'd like to, Dr. Jeffrey, ask you a little bit about the Advanced Technology Program, if I may. I understand from Mr. Borrus that he feels that that is an important program, and I understand that the administration feels otherwise, that the administration wants to, sees no need for it. Could you please explain that disparity? Is there a particular need now, as Mr. Borrus claims, for seed stage investing? Please illuminate that a little bit for me.
Thank you, sir. The administration recognizes the benefits that the ATP program has generated. It is an effectively run program, and actually, I have to say, there's a side I'm actually very proud as NIST director to be hearing about the success stories from all of the programs, because we do execute and run the programs as efficiently and effectively as possible.
And therefore, we need to get rid of it.
The issue isn't whether the program is effectively managed. The issue is, in the administration's viewpoint, is whether or not that's the appropriate role for the federal government to be playing in that role. And it gets down to whether or not the early seed should be, whether there's other policy mechanisms that may be able to help turn the tide that Mr. Borrus described of the private sector investing in the early seed, or whether direct federal investment is necessary. And they basically gets down to the philosophical issue, but there really isn't so much an issue as to the effectiveness.
Well, my understanding of what you're saying is, if it's not broken, break it. I mean, you're saying that the program's working well, but now you're saying that somehow it's not the role of government to be a part of a program that's working well.
There are a lot of effective programs that we can have that will have different levels of priority for the federal government. And, clearly we're in a position where there are tight federal budgets, and we have to prioritize what our investments are going to be based upon not just merit, but also where we can make the biggest difference as a federal government. And that's what gets folded into the calculus.
Well, let me give Mr. Borrus a chance if you'd like to add something.
I would only say that not only is it an appropriate role for the federal government, it's a historically consistent, well-established role for the federal government over at least the last century and a half, if not longer, since the Morrill Act, creation of land-grant colleges and the Agricultural Extension Service, which similarly, for the technologies of its time, sought to move innovation out of the colleges and out of the research institutes into agriculture. It's not a departure for the U.S. government. It's not something new. It is a historically consistent and well-received tradition, and it ought to be continued.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to try to get two questions in, but first, and I'd like a fairly direct and maybe a yes or no answer to one of the questions. Dr. Jeffrey and Dr. Williams, both of you referred to NIST report that identifies over 700 measurement barriers to innovation in critical industries. Give me not 700, but a few of the concrete examples of some of these barriers first, and then just tell me whether or not there's a consensus on which barriers ought to be a priority for NIST to address. That last one you can say yes or no and without naming them. But give me just some examples where we'll have it in the record. Dr. Williams, you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Specifically in this area of nanotechnology, we are now getting into the realm where electronic devices on circuits are just a few atoms thick, and they're starting to get tens of atoms wide. And in the not-too-distant future, literally a single electronic device will be made up of a handful of atoms. The metrology requirements for first of all, measuring the size of the device and then identifying which atoms are in the device and where they are within the device are absolutely daunting, and yet they're absolutely crucial for being able to understand the operation and being able to design future types of devices. So it's this issue of literally counting and identifying individual atoms in a three-dimensional structure, which is the when we can get to that point, the amount of progress that we're going to be able to make will really be stunning. So I would say that for me is a key and critical issue. Also, another one is literally metering light particles, photons, one at a time. We're now at the stage where we're generating and detecting single photons, and we're using those single photons to carry important information. And that is another issue which is key and critical to the issue of metrology.
Dr. Jeffrey, you want to?
Actually, Dr. Williams did an excellent job, and thank you for allowing a plug. And here's a copy of the report that I'll leave for you afterwards. I'll just add that...
They'll have all 700 of them in there.
Actually, it does. There's a CD in the back with all the data. Believe me, it's a fascinating read.
With pictures? Or
not so many pictures, sorry. But one of the things I'll just add is that what we concentrated on was 11 different industry sectors in this as a beginning. And so it runs the gamut from several of the measurements that Dr. Williams described down to some of the more near-term needs of today's auto industry, information technology, and others. And I'll leave a copy behind for you, sir.
Thank you for it. Should have given me one the other day, and I'd been studying it, and I could have taken a test on it or something.
We just released it on Monday, sir.
And I was going to ask if there's a consensus on which barriers should be priority for NIST to address, but they're probably prioritized in your article there, are they not?
Well, one of the things that we're doing, sir, is that we're taking these and we're now doing what I'll call a deep dive, trying to identify whether or not there are some systemic issues as opposed to 723 separate ones that would be the ones to really focus on. And one of the unique aspects of what this study did was it identified measurement barriers to innovation that may not fall just within the NIST purview. And so we're reaching out to industry, to universities, to other government agencies so that we can get a more comprehensive attack on these issues. But we're at the point now where we're starting to look at the systemic issues to see if there are systemic issues, which would then lead to that prioritization.
I lost a bet. I bet that I could get a yes or no. And,
yes.
There was a president who didn't speak very much, and a young journalist said, "Mr. President, I have a bet that I can get you to say at least 3 words." His answer was, "You lose." Thank you for that. But Dr. Jeffrey, while I'm talking to you, over the past several years, this committee, we've been active in promoting nationwide transition to electronic health records that we think hold great promise for reducing medical errors and lowering the cost of medical care. Can you summarize the efforts that NIST has made to help the Department of Health and the Human Services promote EHRs and the adoption of information technology solutions generally within the healthcare industry?
Yes, thank you, sir. NIST has been working very closely as a partner supporting HHS, which has the lead on this. And we're working in several different areas. One is working with private sector and standards development organizations to try to get some coherence and compatibility on some of the standards for interoperability of systems. We're also working supporting some of the contracts that HHS has out, providing some technical underpinning to that, and also looking at some of the validation mechanisms that will come into play. So we're sort of tied in with HHS, throughout sort of the full end-to-end gamut.
I thank you. My time's out, and I understand we can write letters, make inquiries, and they will answer them. I have a follow-up to that, but my time's up, and I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and you are absolutely correct, as always.
Time was.
Time was up, and you can make written inquiry. Mr. Matheson, the gentleman from Utah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I had another meeting and didn't get to be here to hear all the testimony, and want to cover something that I think has been discussed a little bit before. But, Dr. Jeffrey, I want to ask you a couple of questions, again, related to the MEP program. This is a program, as we all know, is a state-federal partnership. And I'm curious, since there's been this continued annual process where the administration's advocated reductions in the MEP budget, if the administration has ever consulted with the states and their funding agencies about your intent and how the program would operate under the budget cut. It is my understanding that, at least in my state of Utah, the MEP Center has not been consulted on this budget proposal. And I think that many state agencies would likely simply reduce their share of matching funds if the federal share is cut. But do you have an understanding of how states would react to these proposed cuts?
In terms of the outreach, obviously one of the issues is discussing the budgets before it's actually submitted. Since the budget proposal has come up to the Hill, I know that the director of the MEP program has been talking with the centers, having them understand what the implications would be and having them start thinking about what the right approach should be to be moving forward. But this is, as you point out, this, I believe, is the 5th year of the seesaw, and so there's, I wouldn't say there's a complete shock to the centers, but we are working with them now, and before any kind of recompetition would occur, to make sure that everybody understands what the ground rules are, what we're looking for, and how to maintain the most effective process for the small manufacturers that are out there.
Let me ask, as I understand it, one of the justifications from OMB for the budget cut in the MEP program was that almost 20% of the MEP clients are manufacturing firms that have more than 250 employees, and that these firms would be able to make up the funding difference due to their size. Is this an indication that the administration now considers manufacturers with more than 250 employees as outside the traditional federal definition of a small business? Point being, like the SBA defines small businesses as having less than 500 employees.
I'm not sure about the specific OMB reference that you're making, but we've adopted the SBA definition for what small manufacturers so that we're consistent with that. So the 500 people under the MEP program.
Okay. But the OMB. Well, then we do have a disagreement here, and we'll follow up in written form and show you the OMB document that shows they define it as if you're over 250, you don't need MEP anymore, and be happy to share that with you. Because I'm curious what evidence the administration is using to say that clients with more than 250 employees suddenly don't need MEP. I think that would be a helpful exchange to have. Because, quite frankly, I think you know this, the average manufacturing size in this country is about 33 employees. One more question on MEP. Is there a sense under the proposed budget how NIST is going to decide which centers will remain operational, assuming there will be a smaller system overall?
Yes, so one of the things that we discussed was that there would be a recompetition that would basically have the centers come back with a plan for how they would be able to keep their effective services with the lower federal budget. And that could involve a number of things, from cost savings within the centers to consolidation to fee extraction to whatever business model they want to have. One of the things that I think is very important to maintain is that there is an important role for the federal government in the MEP program, and I think it's very important that we understand that. There's really 3 absolutely critical core missions that the federal government needs to maintain. One is it has to be a driver for producing the new kinds of products, services that can then get propagated throughout the network, things like the lean manufacturing, some of the other concepts that were talked about by two of the witnesses. Second, it has to maintain the quality of each of the centers. There needs to be essentially the umbrella organization to ensure that an absolute standard of quality is maintained. And third, it basically has to have enough skin in the game so that the focus does stay on the small manufacturers and doesn't just go to those customers that might be what centers might gravitate to without the federal pressure. And those are the three really critical pieces that we need to be able to maintain within this, and I think we can do that within that budget.
Well, Dr. Jeffrey, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with those three factors is what needs to be maintained, but it seems like the proposed budget cut runs completely counter to the desire to maintain these or pursue these three factors, and I suspect there's a bipartisan group on this committee who disagrees with this proposed budget cut. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize to you and to the witnesses for being late, but in fact I was giving a speech to a German-American group very worried about technology transfer.
Dr. Ehlers, you're forgiven as the only member of Congress to have ever been late.
Yes, but I try to be on time. But it's ironic to come from that conference where a foreign country is very eagerly trying to determine how we do technology transfer and knowledge transfer, as they said, and learning about America, and to come here to this discussion. First of all, Dr. Jeffrey, I am very pleased that you are heading NIST. It's an institution I've had a soft spot for many years. I've used their services as a scientist. I served on a review panel for NBS, as it was called back then. One time, really got to know the inner workings, and I'm pleased with what you were doing. The fact that it's NIST instead of NBS indicates a definite change of function, not in any way cutting back the traditional, but adding to it things such as MEP, ATP. In other words, ways to directly assist the manufacturing in this country. I know you mentioned earlier that the administration has some disagreements about the functions of MEP and particularly ATP. Let me assure you that they are wrong, and I've been fighting a battle with them for some years. And I've always been trying to find out who the little man in the basement of the White House is that holds that view, and I've yet to locate him, but yet the attitude there is of that nature. I will be the first. I never worked with MEP, incidentally, when I was in the state legislature as well. It's a good program. I'm not saying it can't be improved, and I'm certainly willing to see a review. I'm willing to look at new ideas. But I don't want the objective of that review to be to change MEP for ideological reasons rather than pragmatic reasons. And I'm very concerned about any attempts to change it, and that's why the Congress has always fought this. ATP is a different matter. I think ATP does have to be restructured. I think it should be resurrected in a restructured form, and that could also be extremely useful. I will not defend the way it operated originally, even though it was not that bad, but I think it could be improved. MEP can be improved as well, but it has to have the right motivation. I'm not here castigating you or anyone in particular in the administration, but I'm very concerned about those ideologues who simply think it is improper for the federal government to be working with industry in the way it does. And that I object to strongly because other countries are trying to find out how we do it because we do it so well. So it's absolutely idiotic to, on ideological grounds, try to kill a program that's helping industry, helping our nation, helping our economy. And I appreciate especially the report the quotation from Dr. Williams, quoting Benjamin Franklin, who should be the patron saint of all industry and political leaders in this country, which he said, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. Just yesterday, I testified before the House Budget Committee, along with Congressman Rush Holt, my fellow physicist. And he made the point, too, about investments, that there is no expenditure of money that we make in the federal budget that has a greater return than investment in science and technology. There's no question about it. So we have to continue with that. And I say, if you want to review MEP and modify it just on the basis of making a good program better, God bless you, and we'll be happy to work with you and help you. But I would resist any impetus to do it on the basis of the beliefs of some people in the administration that somehow this is something the government should not be doing, and that we have to restructure it because of some ideological beliefs. I am not negative on the administration. I appreciate what they've done. I appreciate the president. He's a good man. I've had good conversations with him about these issues, and frankly, he is in tune with what I'm trying to do. So whoever is saying that the administration, quotes, has problems, I don't think is speaking for the president. Having said that diatribe, I would be happy to hear comments from anyone on the panel who wishes to comment on my diatribe. Dr. Jeffrey?
If I could add just a word. Thank you very much, sir. And obviously, one point that I want to make sure does not get lost on this is that, obviously we stand by, and I personally stand by, to work with you and anyone else on this committee to try to improve any program that we've got, and I look forward to that. So thank you.
Well, since you got 3 Nobel Prizes in 10 years, I don't think we have to worry about improving your research program at this point. But ATP definitely needs improvement. ME needs some tinkering. And I think that's the best approach to take. I'm sorry my time has expired. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And while I'm going to be nicer to the little fella, and I'm not referring to anyone in particular. The gentleman from Michigan referred to a little fellow in the White House that he's been looking for. I'm not going to call that person Mr. Borrus, we're going to get to you eventually, but I'm going to get this off my chest first. And Dr. Jeffrey, I love you like a brother. You have been terrific. This is not directed at you. You are, consider you a conduit from this end of Pennsylvania Avenue to what Dr. Ehlers has referred to as the fellow in the basement that he hasn't been able to find, what you have referred to as an ideology, but let us consider this a conversation with the philosopher in the White House who has repeatedly cut back on MEP, has repeatedly zeroed out ATP, and I'd like to ask that philosopher, Dr. Jeffrey, you must be embarrassed to be here because you are a scientist, and you just told us that ATP is a fine program and is doing great things. Now, if we were back 150 years, would that philosopher in the White House be opposed to public libraries and we'd be counting on Andrew Carnegie? If we were back in the time of Abraham Lincoln and there were debates when he was in the state legislature in Illinois, should the public be involved in building roads or canals, or should that be a private enterprise? Merely 100 years ago, is it a legitimate role for the federal government to ban child labor or to begin to work toward a 40-hour work week? There were 9 old men across the street who felt it was not an appropriate role, and it wasn't until court packing a while later, I'm mixing my history a little bit, but it shook those 9 old men up enough that they started letting some of that legislation live rather than stomping it out over at the Supreme Court. Now, moving it to a more relevant period, space exploration. There is a very legitimate role for the private sector in low-orbit space exploration, but there are some folks who are thinking that NASA could be replaced in deep space exploration, and quite frankly, I just don't think the numbers crunch. Now, that philosopher down at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, an OMB or somewhere else with a deep basement, I've always said this administration would privatize everything except for the Marine Corps. Then I went to Iraq. They are privatizing the Marine Corps. They are called contractors, and I don't know how many of them there are because I don't know if anybody's ever gotten count, but we are reducing our troop numbers, and we are outsourcing the Marine Corps. At some point, philosophy hits the hard wall of reality. And I apologize to you for laying your ears back a little bit about this, but it's not directed to you, Dr. Jeffrey, because you are in a very uncomfortable spot of being a scientist, representing a bunch of philosophers down at the other end of the street. So just carry that message back and tell me what they say over a beer sometime. Mr. Borrus, the administration asserts that there's plenty of venture capital funds, and you say there isn't. Could you expand a little bit further on your comments about where venture capital has gone and why they're investing, shall we say, in more mature technologies and not perhaps in seed round and bridging the valley of death?
Venture investors will only commit large amounts of capital that they have at their disposal when they can assess with some degree of specificity at least three kinds of risks that venture investors look at. Technology risk, is this something that's at all possible from a scientific standpoint? Can it be achieved at appropriate price performance points to have an impact? Market risk, is there a growing market into which this new technological innovation has some hope of being sold by an innovative startup, not a large established business that already has well-established distribution channels? Is the market large enough to generate the kind of return that venture capitalists look for? And execution risk. Is this a team that can be built to execute on this business idea? In a certain sense, you can define the seed stage of a de novo startup's life as that point in time in which it's really not possible yet to assess those kinds of risks. It's really the point of time when you need to have a leap of faith and believe that if you do a little work and begin to transition an idea, a fledgling technology, a rudimentary bit of science out of the lab and toward the commercial marketplace, that you can begin to get your hands around technology risk, sales risk, or market risk, and execution risk sufficiently to then convince yourselves it's worth committing a large amount of capital, say $5 to $7 million, in an early stage round of investment, that you can earn the kind of return by committing that capital that you need to earn to satisfy, as a venture investor, the investors who give you the money that you use to invest, your limited partners. And so the bulk of the industry has gotten so large that it's moved away from being willing to take those kinds of leaps of faith. They have a lot of capital they need to commit. They can't commit it in the small increments necessary to take the first few steps.
Mr. Borrus, in some respects, the problem is that it takes about the same amount of due diligence to invest $1 million as it takes to invest $80 million.
In some cases more, yes.
In some cases more due diligence.
Thank you for making that point for me.
So, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the data that the National Venture Capital Association collects, it's just very clear that the bulk of the industry is no longer doing very early stage, seed stage investing. There's still some venture funds that do early stage investing, but the vast bulk of the money that's spent actually goes to much later stages in a startup's life. It just is not available for the riskiest.
With my remaining minute and a half, 2 minutes, apparently there's a philosophical disagreement at the other end of the street, and there's a concern about picking winners and losers. How would you try to address picking of winners and losers, which some believe should be left to the private sector?
I think picking winners and losers is a profoundly misleading metaphor. It's, in a certain sense, it's to substitute sloganeering for a thorough understanding of how risky early-stage technology innovation actually works. No investor, neither public nor private investor, picks winners and losers. Ultimately, as the gentleman to my left and right, I think, will testify, it's the market that picks winners and losers, by which I mean, of course, your competitors on the one hand and your customers on the other. And, so investors don't pick winners and losers. What they do is they plant seeds. In this particular area of high-risk innovation, they plant technology seeds. And in the planting of seeds, there is a well-defined historical tradition, a well-defined historically traditional role that the federal government can and should play of planting technology seeds in areas of either private market failure or acute national need. And that's what ATP has done. That's what the federal government does in other programs, and it's
Mr. Borrus,
an essential role.
Let me interrupt you just with my last 30 seconds. There are some concerns that ATP may benefit only a single company. Others say that the benefit is broader than that. It casts a broader shadow. What is your view of that particular discussion?
I think that view is completely, flatly wrong. Look, all government development programs, to distinguish it from basic research funding, have to work through individual companies in a market economy such as ours. In ATP's case, right, the measured social returns of the program far outstrip the total program dollars spent over the life of the program as a whole, and of course, consequently far dwarf the amount of dollars going to any individual company. The resulting social benefits in the form of jobs, in the form of seeding new technology industries that come into being, in the form of consumer benefits, are exceptional, substantial. I mean, I suggest the critics who take that view ask those who have been diagnosed with breast cancer through ATP-funded digital mammography innovation and subsequently treated because of the early detection that ATP-funded innovation enabled, ask them whether they think the benefits of the program only went to a company or two.
Thank you, Mr. Borrus. I wanted to give you a chance to finish answering the question. Dr. Jeffrey, I just want to return for a moment. Again, I still love you, but returning to that philosopher in the basement of OMB, every person has a right to be a Luddite, but at least you should be a consistent Luddite. Now, we provide plenty of funding at Department of Energy and other agencies that invest in private sector technology. An example would be the Hydrogen Initiative, the Clean Coal Initiative over at the CIA, the Incutel project that has been investing, doing pretty much what ATP does. And Dr. Jeffrey, if I were you, I'd be really angry that they're letting the CIA in the investment realm do things that they want to take away from you. And with that, I would like to turn to the gentleman from Michigan, Dr. Ehlers.
Well, I've already given my diatribe, so I won't add to yours. But I do want to have one specific question, Dr. Jeffrey, that I was I'm asking on behalf of the committee. You highlighted the recently created Joint Quantum Institute with the University of Maryland. There's some concern, was Maryland selected as through a peer-reviewed competitive process, or what, if not, why, how did this come about without peer review if there was no peer reviewer?
The review was done internally by looking at basically the statistics that the National Science Foundation and National Academy have in terms of ranking different institutions in terms of physics, in this case, since it's a physics-based institution, that looked at metrics like their ranking in terms of the publications, the grad students, their ability to expand into quantum era, and one of the also others attributes was the synergy in terms of the expertise. Maryland actually came out very well. University of Maryland came out very well in all those, and one very important point is that Maryland is one of the best institutions in terms of condensed matter physics, and this is essentially one of the best institutions in the purely quantum phenomena. What we end up with is that, as you know, some of the work that we've been doing in quantum realm, creating new forms of matter, Bose-Einstein condensates, fermion condensates, we're basically at the point where we've got quantum physicists that have been trained as quantum physicists creating these forms of matter that are essentially acting sort of like quantum liquids. We have another entire branch of physics, condensed matter physics, where University of Maryland excels, that actually has a lot of theory and nomenclature in that area. And by combining these two institutions together, we actually believe that we can actually cross physics disciplines and actually completely accelerate the field. So we looked very hard at all of the various metrics that are kept by the Academy and kept by the Science Foundation and made a determination. We then did put out a Federal Register notice to explain our intent, and we only had one university other than the University of Maryland that came back, and in further analysis and discussions with them, they agreed they were not the right institution.
Now, if you're going to be working on the Bose-Einstein condensate, are you taking that work away from the scientists at Boulder and Gila, or is this supplementary? Or?
Yeah, this is definitely supplementary. This is not removing the Nobel Prize winning work out in Colorado at all. It's really extending beyond that.
I see. All right. Thank you very much. And I must say I'm intrigued by the chairman's words about the philosopher. I had never thought of this person as being a philosopher. But since I haven't met that person, I don't know. With that comment, I will yield back.
Dr. Ehlers, it is the task of this committee to elevate all discussions. Mr. Borrus, the federal government has invested to date perhaps a little bit over $7 billion in the National Nanotechnology Initiative over a multi-year period, and the administration is requesting approximately another $1.5 billion investment in the National Nanotechnology Initiative for Fiscal 08. Justification has been that it will bring about the development of a whole new industrial sector, but the challenge is that current federal funding is very much focused on basic research in nanotechnology. We have heard from the nanotech industry about the gap in funding between research and having proof of concept, getting to the point where it'll attract venture funding. In your view, should the ATP program be one component of the federal nanotechnology initiative?
To echo Mr. Hall, one word, yes.
Thank you. Now, we do live in a world of budgetary constraints. Now, there's a general agreement, and we hear this from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, about the need for a strong innovation agenda, which includes significant funding increases for research and development, and on my part, I hope for education, both K through 12 and higher education. Now, the administration has thus far focused primarily on basic research in the Competitiveness initiative. Should the ATP program be a significant component of the federal innovation agenda? And if it's a one-word answer, yes, why?
Yes. Why? You only unleash the social impacts that benefit the nation when you transition something out of the lab and into the commercial marketplace. Without, as I've tried to indicate, there are some major gaps in financing for that precise part of the problem. And that's a gap that I'm trying to fill, but that I obviously, by myself, am not going to be able to fill very much of it. There's clearly a role for other funding mechanisms, federal funding mechanisms, and in particular for ATP there as well. And maybe I should elaborate on my nanotech piece. It is beginning to trickle out a little. Many of the things I look at and consider investing in these days have a nanoscale engineering component to it. I think, by the way, that it's probably wrong to think about nanotechnology as a new emerging industry. It is a technology that will be very widely applied across a very big number of industries. It is already beginning to transform chemistry, transform material science, ultimately will have very significant impacts in the manufacturing industries as well. Facilitating that transition holds out one of the best hopes for generating the kind of innovation and revival and continued leadership by American industry as a whole that can sustain a growing standard of living in this country in light of the challenges that we face.
Are there any other questions from the members present? If not, I'd just like to say that we all strongly support NIST, and especially the NIST laboratories. They've done well in terms of federal financial support, and they've done even better in terms of their success. 3 Nobel prizes is just the tip of the iceberg. What we want is a balance between the laboratory enterprise and the other very important things that NIST does, and we will insist upon a sensible, fact-based set of policies in science and in economics for our economy's sakes. As much as we may have interesting discussions with philosophers, when we get down to science and running our economy, I think that it is wise to pay heed to fact-based, numbers-based constraints. And Dr. Jeffrey, I'd look forward to working with you to develop that. I believe that you want to do that, and I want to thank the panelists, all of you all who made this journey to this wonderful frosted town today to make significant contributions to this very, very important discussion. I thank you all very much. I want to thank all of you for coming. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is now adjourned.